While we sleep, the guardians of the night take to the streets, having said goodbye to those they love. Each other knowing they may never say these words again, they face the evil that we run from. They dedicate their lives to those that would hate them because they wear the badge. They wear the badge not for the glory or recognition, but for the passion to help others. This is the LEO First Podcast. We'll talk to the men and women in law enforcement, those that have retired, those that keep the prisons secure, and anyone who's impacted by law enforcement. We'll peel back the curtain, and you'll get the real stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Every law enforcement officer has a story to tell. Get ready to hear from the men and women who put their lives on the line every day for their communities and their country. Welcome to the LEO First Podcast. Now, here's your host, Michael Laidler.
Hey everybody, it's Michael Laidler, your host of the LEO First Podcast, and we are again sitting down with an amazing guest, and I met her a couple of months ago in Denver at the FBI National Academy, and I knew that once we met, which was kind of weird because we were actually connected on LinkedIn before we actually met in person. And a lot of us know that's actually a very common thing nowadays. You usually meet people through social media. And then over time, through just being out and about and being all these conferences, you just tend to find that person in person. Then once we realized what our passion was and we were able to talk a little more at the conference, it was like, okay, I need to get this person on the show because what she had going on and what she's continued to build and grow, I know is a benefit to all law enforcement. I can tell you my son followed her and her dog around for 2 days at the conference. I had to hear about this dog, this canine partner, this amazing entity for 2 straight days. My son was like, where's Barron? Where's Barron? And I'm like, son, let's go eat. Where's Barron? So I said, after all of that, I have to have her on. I have to have her share her experiences, her life, what's led her to where she's at. And I know that you guys are really going to enjoy this gem that was unearthed, at least in my world, back in July, August. Without further ado, our guest tonight is Jennie Hill. Jennie, tell us about you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Barron is actually right next to me as well. You already spoke about him. He is always right beside me. I know if your son were here, he'd be so excited as well. I have been with the Wounded Blue since we launched at Police Week in 2019. Our founder is Lieutenant Randy Sutton. We're headquartered out of Las Vegas, although I live just a little bit north of Atlanta in Buford, Georgia. And I'm sure we'll talk about how I came to be a part of the Wounded Blue. I'm a former officer. I was an officer in Montgomery County, Maryland, and then an officer for an agency down here in Georgia as well, before I was injured in the line of duty back in 2011, and then unfortunately forced out because of my injury in 2013.
And it's kind of interesting because I love that we start off with Barron right out the gate. And prior to getting into Wounded Blue, especially in your role as executive director, were you into canines, especially work canines, prior to that?
Not at all. I had kind of toyed with the idea of going into canine as an officer. I was street cop, road cop, loved it. Had kind of toyed with going into detectives, maybe canine at some point, but I loved being on the streets, and I worked morning watch, and that was my favorite shift. You could get into everything under the sun, and had never actually thought I would end up with a service dog until I ended up with a service dog. And obviously I'll talk all day long about Barron because he's one of the coolest dogs.
He is. Yeah, I've met him multiple times. Like I said, my son forced me to meet him multiple times. So after a while, he was like, Dad, I'm going to go to the Wounded Blue booth. I was like, okay. And then he ended up finding you guys. It was very a 10-year-old walking around with a couple of thousand law enforcement officers. It wasn't weird, but it was kind of weird. Cause I was like, he's probably one of the safest environments. An environment that I felt more safe in than that was when I went to about a year and a half ago in Texas. I spoke at the Texas Tactical Police Officers Association, TTPOA, and it was a room full of SWAT and tactical officers. So that was actually the most safe I've ever felt at a conference, because I knew every single person in there was armed and ready to shoot. Now, we go to some of these other conferences where you have chiefs and sheriffs, and they still understand how to shoot, but they're not shooting every day or every week like these SWAT guys. So I felt very safe having my son walk around there. But getting back to the canine, I was a canine handler at one point. I actually had a Belgian Malinois, and I had my dog. He was a work dog for 2 years. He was trained in like scents and finding people, and it was amazing. It was amazing, not just for the working side, but I was able to bring him home, and he was an extension of my family. It was one of the best experiences I ever had as a law enforcement officer. When you look back at Barron and when you first got him, was he your first dog, your first service dog, or did you have prior dogs before that?
He is my first service dog, and I got him at 10 weeks, and he is 2.5 years old now. And it took me quite a while to actually accept the fact that I needed a service dog. He's actually a mobility from my injury, mobility and PTSD dog. I was diagnosed in 2013 with PTSD. And so the reality and acceptance of PTSD, I think, came full circle. PTSD is okay. It's okay to talk about. I talk all the time about it now, but I think it was the realization that I had a diagnosis and accepting it took a little while. But now wide open about it, talking about it and wanting to help end the stigma surrounding PTSD. And of course, he gets to walk around and help me in that talk as well. He's 100-pound German Shepherd. He's an old world German Shepherd, so he's really tall and long. And people stare at us all the time when we go to get on the plane. We fly almost weekly, bi-weekly, currently, just traveling all over the country, and people will stare at us. And even when they get on the plane, they'll come look for me to find out where in the world is this dog laying. I get asked all the time, does he have his own seat? And I explained he doesn't. He goes right up under the seat in front of me. Thankfully, I have very short legs because I'm pretty short. And so he goes right up under me and my feet go right on him, and he sleeps the whole time, whether it's a 5-hour trip out to California or an hour trip to Florida. He knows his place. He's been flying since he was 6 months. He's just a really cool service dog. And he's dually trained in therapy, which makes him even more amazing. So when he's off command, he can kind of work a room, and he picks up on others who are really needing him. He picks up on stress and anxiety and those who may be dealing with PTSD as well. And he just goes over and he'll sit next to him. And dogs are amazing anyway. Even if they aren't PTSD dogs, there's just something about lowering the anxiety levels, and he'll put his head on someone's lap if they're, shaking their leg or dogs make people smile in general. So I can talk about him all day. So
yeah, no, and we're going to talk about him. We're going to talk about him to a good amount, because you said 2013 and when you got your initial diagnosis with PTSD. And I will tell anybody that's listening or anybody that's wearing a uniform now, if you were in law enforcement in 2013, there was a heavy stigma around PTSD. It's nothing like 2023 when we're on the air right now. And sometimes it's still a stigma there. And I know part of Wounded Blue and part of your mission and your passion is trying to let officers of all types, male, female, young, old, black, white, police, corrections, whatever it might be, that it's okay to have a mental illness. But part of understanding that is seek out help. And that's I know that's where Wounded Blue is really pushing and promoting some of that. Was it kind of like let me ask you this. What came first, Wounded Blue or Barron?
Wounded Blue. Wounded Blue came first.
And was it
So
just like
the
a
chicken or
natural?
the egg? Chicken or the egg?
So was it just like a natural thing, or did Wounded Blue teach you something that you didn't know about yourself?
It was kind of a process. I mean, Wounded Blue came on after. I guess I should back up kind of with my story and how Wounded Blue came to be, and then sort of how Barron came after that. If it might make a little more sense
Yeah,
there.
please.
So I went through Montgomery County's academy back in 2005, and then obviously then FTO started. We all have FTO, and
Yes.
2 days into FTO, I had a guy die in my arms, and I won't ever forget that. I was actually on the way to my district, and the guy was my neighbor. And you learn so much in the academy from the videos about death and um, how to handle it, but when it happens in real life, it's just, I think I was in denial as to what happened. And I remember I later found out he had a heart attack. Of course, I had no idea.
Yeah, you don't know. Yeah.
Doctor, yeah, I had no idea. But he had hit the accelerator, came through a bunch of backyards, and I ran out there and jumped in the back seat, held his neck like I had, been trained, and was talking to him. And as long as I was talking to him, his heart rate was going up, and he was trying to talk. But as soon as I was yelling at neighbors, someone to call 911, and trying to triage everything that was going on around me, I ended up losing him. And then I had to go to work an hour later, which was wild to me. And so I go to work, and I remember just tearing up. I wasn't crying or anything. Obviously it was shock. And I remember my FTO at the time saying, "Are you okay?" In a very gruff manner. And I just looked at him and I said, "I don't know." And I explained to him what happened, and he said, "Well, I think you should go see Dr. Ginger, who was our EAP." And so I was voluntold to go to EAP. And so I did. And I'll never forget going in this tiny closet of an office and sitting on this pink couch and talking to Dr. Ginger, and literally being given 3 days off. And here I'm thinking, I just got out of this very, very long academy. It was very military style, something I didn't know. I had come out of banking. I mean, I'd never thought about
Yeah, that's a
banking
big
before.
difference. Yeah.
Yeah, huge
Yeah,
difference.
that is a difference.
Um,
Yes.
and I'd actually been held up in a bank robbery. That's how I actually got into policing. Um, and so I she gave me 3 days off, and I was thinking, great, now my job's on the line, because I teared up. I showed emotion. And from that moment on, I said I would never show emotion again the rest of my career, because I did not want to get pink slipped. I did not want to lose my job over showing emotion. And so I didn't. Um, and that was actually my demise, because I tried to hide it. And then, of course, dark humor. I mean, that's just law enforcement as it is, right? So I
Yeah.
learned that very quickly. Laughed it off. I still do. Humor is my coping mechanism. But so every death call, every child call, you go to the death of a 1 month old, and then the next thing you're on is a traffic stop, and you suppress it, you suppress it, you suppress it. At least I did. And I didn't talk about it. I had just gone through a really bad divorce. Didn't talk about the divorce. Didn't handle the divorce. That's like a grieving process in of itself, and I
It
didn't
is.
grieve it. Um, and so fast forward 4 years later, I moved to Georgia and worked for an agency down there. And same thing, back to back calls of kids wrapped
Nonstop.
around. Yeah, kids wrapped around a tree, traffic stops, you name it. And we just don't process it. I'm speaking about me, but so many officers in the same boat. First
A lot.
responders.
A lot. A
Yes.
lot. A lot don't process it like we should.
And I was trained, as I said, my first FTO, suck it up, buttercup. And one of the things he said to me, because I teared up, I wasn't crying or anything. I just teared up from shock. is maybe you're not cut out for this job.
Mm.
The worst thing you could say to anybody. Now, the reality is, I realize now he probably should have gone with me to EAP, but I didn't know at the time, about mental health. We didn't talk about it back in 05, 06 at all. I'm so grateful we do now. That's the silver lining. I say, when I teach, I say, look for your silver lining. The silver lining now is that I've learned a whole lot now. But so fast forward to working in Georgia, same thing, beat feeding. And then in 2011, was clearing a house on a burglar alarm with my beat partner and fell down a flight of stairs and grabbed the banister. Did not want to drop my gun, so was still holding my gun, but ended up tearing out my shoulder, ended up getting a severe concussion, TBI. Somehow cleared the house, somehow drove to a fire station, and then I don't remember anything after that. Apparently, I reached out to a sergeant, gave the wrong firehouse that I was at. Eventually, they found me, got me to the hospital. And I was temporarily paralyzed on the right side of my body for 2 weeks in the hospital. The wake-up call for me, and kind of what started the whole process of what I called the dark rabbit hole or my spiral, was that my chief at the time and deputy chief stopped by the hospital, and the hospital was within a couple of blocks of headquarters, and they dropped off their business card. And I never saw him. And that was huge to me because I had gone to Police Week as part of the department's representatives. And then the reality was, this is a business and I'm a number. And it's, the whole thing about brotherhood with two departments. I went through two different academies, and this whole brotherhood thing went out the door, and now I was just a number. And so I'm sitting in the hospital, which gives you a lot of time to think. Still trying to learn to walk, talk, move, essentially on my right side. And I started spiraling very quickly. And started thinking, I would have been worth more dead than alive. Terrible thought process, but I started feeling like I was a burden on my family. And having gone to Police Week, because I'd worked in Montgomery County near DC, since 05, and knowing that we honored fallen officers, and I would never take that honor away from them, but feeling like my family would have been honored every year, and instead of what injured officers go through where they're forgotten. And that's the process that I went through, is feeling like I was alone and abandoned by my own agency, who I would have given anything for. I was very much about wanting to represent my department and making sure that they looked good, on the street. And I loved my community that I served, both communities. I would be back out there in a heartbeat. I'm still state certified to this day, but I jokingly say every year I'm going to go back, but I'm not, because I love what I do now. But so that spiral was serious, and got out of the hospital, went through a whole lot, surgeries and so forth. And in 2013, unfortunately, I was forced out because of my injury. And that continued, that dark spiral. I think it got worse. And there was a day that I just said I was done. And I started writing a letter, and it was my suicide note. And it still affects me to this day, because I'm so grateful that someone actually reached out to me, which is what still spurs me to this day to continue my why and my purpose and my passion of what I do with the Wounded Blue, and why our whole team does what we do. And writing that letter was because, and it's interesting because, I didn't understand suicide. I mean, so many people do say it's selfish and so forth, but to me, I felt like I was such a burden. And that's not true. I know that now, but mentally I was just not in the right place. And I had a friend reach out to me one day while I was writing that, in fact, and he just said I was on his mind, and he said, "Are you okay?" And our typical response is, "Yeah, I'm good,"
Yeah.
or "Yeah, I'm fine," right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it actually
Totally.
crossed my mind to say, "Yeah, I'm good," even though I absolutely was anything but good at that time. And I actually broke down and told him, "I'm not good." And I told him what was going on. And we ended up talking for the next 3 hours. And his name was Rob Michaels. He actually was the founder of Serve and Protect. Unfortunately, he passed away um, the end of last year. But he talked me off the ledge. And I'm so grateful for that because I ended up getting into counseling. He helped me realize that where I was mentally was not okay, but was okay. And I wasn't alone. And that was the biggest thing because for literally since my accident, I felt alone and I felt abandoned and I felt like, okay, I'm going to save face and I'm going to smile through it. And everybody thinks I'm okay, but I was not okay at all. And so, getting into counseling and getting into therapy, and I did, I was diagnosed with PTSD from so many things that happened in my career, critical incidents back to back to back. A lot of things that I thought I dealt with, but I didn't. I didn't know how to deal with it. We're doing a lot better now of helping officers and first responders deal with critical incidents. But I mean, it's like a volcano. Eventually, it's going to erupt. And for me, it did erupt. Um, or I was in the process of erupting, I should say. And because of him, he essentially saved my life. And I ended up actually becoming a peer team member with Serve and Protect, his organization, in 2014 after I got the help I needed. And part of that was and we all have um, walks of belief, and it's interesting because I have friends who are atheist and agnostic, and friends who are strong Protestant and so forth. And I have friends who say I don't believe anything. I'm like, well, actually, you do because that's what you believe is
Yeah.
nothing.
I,
So
I think
there
you
you
do
go.
believe something. Yeah.
I think you believe
Yeah.
something. So
Yeah. You believe
we
something. You
have
just don't
those
believe the same thing I do.
exactly. But what it did for me is I had grown up, my dad was a pastor. And so what it did is it really brought me back to my faith. And I didn't realize for a couple of years how angry I was at God. And so for me, it just circled me back to where I needed to be in my own belief system. And so it kind of brought me back full circle. I had a hard time seeing that I could come back to that. Fast forward to 2018, our founder, Lieutenant Randy Sutton, and I were on a board for another nonprofit, and we ended up actually leaving that nonprofit and talking. And I had mentioned, about my injury, and he had mentioned about how he had had a stroke in his patrol car and how his agency had forced him out as well. And we both had said, this has to stop. This has to stop for our injured officers. What is there for our injured officers? And I had talked about maybe creating a foundation. And he said, well, I've already thought about this and I want to call it the Wounded Blue. And I was like, well, there's no reason for us both to
Yeah.
join forces. That's what we need to do. I said, I'll help out in any way. And so then we all came together to train. And August of 2018, there were 8 of us who came together to train and formed the Wounded Blue. And then we launched at Police Week in 2019. And since its inception, we have helped over 14,000 officers nationwide, which I think is phenomenal.
It is.
And our motto is never forgotten, never alone. And like I said earlier, the why, the passion, and the purpose of what not only I went through, but I know the rest of our team and each of their situations. So our whole team, peer support is our core, and everyone on our team are either former or current police officers, and all have been injured, whether physically or invisibly. We also have a spousal peer support team, and so everyone relates to where we've been, that forgotten and abandoned feeling of injury. So, and one of the things that I say it's like a fork in the road. It can go one way of why and the other way of why me. And I say, well, you can always say, well, why not me? And then that's where you find your why and your purpose and your passion. And you've got to sometimes dig deep. And so for me, it was the Wounded Blue, and I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to help others.
As I listen to it, there's so many nuggets that I wrote. Everybody knows usually that when I'm listening, like if you watch the video or if there's a video later on, like just in general, people see me always looking down. They're like, what is he looking at? I take a whole bunch of notes on things that stand out, and pretty much I have way too many lines right now that are written down. I'm going to go back a little bit. And one of those things that you touched on that I've heard consistently, and it's just from speakers or other officers at this point, is a term that I don't know if this person coined the term, but I loved when I heard it because it was catchy enough to say, you know what, I could see other people relating. It was called administrative betrayal. And this person had an injury as well. And when they reported it, they started to get kind of that cold shoulder from other leaders. And this person was in a leadership role as well. So it was even more weird because he's like, hey, I'm facing the same thing you guys are facing. Like, why can't I share my emotions? Why can't I have a bad injury? And when you said that the chief and deputy just dropped off their business card, that is so it's so callous for a person to be. But then I start to, as you say it, I start to think, how many times am I hearing this now? Like, how do we overcome this issue? Because it's one thing for us teaching officers, find wellness programs, get involved, get to therapy. But there's another side to that story too, and that's the leadership that's impacted. It may not even be a former leadership. It could just be a senior officer that's on your squad or someone you look up to. And if they don't have the mindset that getting into wellness is important, then you're probably going to be deterred from doing it. So, Jennie, have you guys had any strategies, or are you guys starting to look at different ways to kind of help build leaders in this area of supporting mental wellness programs?
So we actually, part of our development program that we're doing this year specifically is building a leadership program for training.
Yes.
And we actually had this conversation yesterday with part of our executive team. So you're beating me to the punch.
I know. And I cheated because I just started teaching a program like that a couple of months ago. So I only said it because I see it's 100% needed, because people are like,
absolutely.
You know what? There's like, you know what, Michael? I'm in a leadership role and I don't even know what's going on with this wellness program. Or they're not, because who's the first person that usually recognizes? Usually someone you look to as a leader that's going to recognize you have something wrong. Because as people, we're naturally. I've been through 3 academies like you've been through 2, and at the end of the day, they're still telling us hey, you're the alpha, male or female. You need to take care of business and minimize. They're not. I don't think they're saying hide anymore, but they're still saying minimize that emotional trauma you're going to face. But as a leader, you have to get in the point to where now you recognize it's like your FTO back in 2005. I commend him, because back then a lot of FTOs would have saw that, or just people, not FTOs, just people in general, and I'm like, oh, okay, I don't want to ask her. You know what? or I don't want to refer her. And he actually took that step as a leader. And like I said, he probably still had that suck it up buttercup, but he at least had some remorse in his system. So getting back to the leadership. So as you guys are building your stuff, how do you think that's going to make another shift in how we promote wellness in the uniform?
Absolutely. It has to start from the top. I've about 2 weeks ago had an amazing conversation with a chief from a really large agency. And we talked about peer support. There's so many fad words. And I'm sure, I mean, I'll probably have darts thrown at me for this. Resiliency is one of them. It's like everyone has to put it in their title.
Yeah.
Everyone has to put it in like their code word. Yeah, it's the selling word right now. Peer support is as well, right? 5 years ago, you didn't hear a lot about peer support. Now it's the cool thing. Everyone's got a peer support team. Well, now we got to make up new words like peer advocates or whatever. Everyone's coming up with new words. But peer support is reactive. Because if we were ahead of the mental wellness, side of it, we wouldn't need peer support, right? And so it's trying to get ahead of it. Well, really where that starts from is at the top, not the bottom. And peer support is essentially on the front lines, and where we need it to be is at the top. And one of our peer team members is still on the road, and his sheriff is amazing. He really is embracing, but he sees where our peer team member is and what he's doing and where the Wounded Blue has been. And I'm giving credit to the Wounded Blue because the sheriff has said his eyes have been opened to this peer team member and what he's been through as a team member and what it's brought to his agency. And he's already had him doing debriefings and all of that. And I'm like, this is amazing.
That is good.
But can we build this up in every agency so that it becomes a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach? Because I feel like if we're, again, having more of the leadership, seeing where the mental health side is so productive, that we're not sending in peer support every time. And people, and I say people, officers know how to handle a critical incident. We know how to handle debriefings immediately, and debriefings aren't happening 6 months from now. Oh, that critical incident. But now we've had 5 fatalities since then. And now we're trying to address, working backwards versus working forward, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And that's kind of the approach I took about 2 years ago when I started my journey. And I didn't have anything like extensive happen to me when I realized that self-awareness was important, but I started to look at that term and I started to think about in law enforcement, I'd rather be proactive in growing my mind versus reactive. So I looked at the amazing resiliency programs. I looked at the amazing peer support, peer advocate. You're right. Whatever we want to call it. I really enjoyed those classes, but I'm like, you know what? I need to dial back to the person, like, because I want to see them built up before it happens, because traumatic incidents, I mean, law enforcement, it's going to happen. Like you have no choice. Like that's your job. Like literally your career is going into traumatic incidents, military, first responders, whatever group it is, right? You are going into situations that's going to leave a mark in your mind. And for people that's never worn the uniform, if they're listening right now, understand that your friends, your family, the officers you meet on the street, if they've been on the road more than likely for more than a week, and I'm just saying a week because that might be even far-fetched, they have more than likely seen a traumatic event at some point. And their reactions and the way they act, if they seem a little off, that could be why. And they're not going to tell you. I'm not going to, like you said, Jenny, like I'm even nowadays, if something's going on, I'm still initially trained to say, hey, you know what? I'm okay. I'll make it work. But then my secondary mind comes in like, wait. If this person's acting, they're probably asking me for a reason. Let me be honest with them if I have something going on. But when we go back to leadership, I literally like 3 days ago, I watched this video by Simon Sinek, and it's only like a 2-minute clip on some other stuff he was doing. But the title of the video is, "Can you influence leaders?" And it was interesting because his approach was, you can't change a leader's mind. And like the sheriff you have that you're talking about, we have to understand our current leaders, our current command staff, chiefs, deputy chiefs, undersheriffs, sheriffs, more than likely they've been in law enforcement for, let's say, 15 to 20 years, or I mean really 20 to 30 years. So they're still in that mentality of, you know what, we don't need to be pushing our emotions out because that's not what we're taught. So what we have to do and start creating is what we want to see out of them. And that's what Simon Sinek was pushing. He was like, you're not going to be able to change a leader's mind, but you can definitely, from a follower standpoint, you can influence them by your own actions. And you're the one guy you said that's still on the road. That's what it sounds like he's doing with the Wounded Blue. He's showing what he wants his chief to be. And the chief's like, or excuse me, the sheriff. And the sheriff's like, you know what? This makes sense. This young man is, or this person is really displaying what I need to be doing as a leader. So one thing I think that we can do is, like what you guys are starting to do and you guys continue to do, is create that environment where the leaders can see what we want them to promote us to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And really where it starts at is in the academy, but it's the leaders recognizing it. Mm-hmm. And we need to get into the academies, not waiting till officers are on the road, because for me, it was 2 days into FTO. And I mean, seeing the videos is great, but there's a disconnect there, right? And then there's the whole look to your right, look to your left. You may lose one of the officers here. Well, I lost one of my very good friends in the academy 2 years in. Yeah. And, but again, that reality wasn't there. We have to get into the academies, and that's where the wellness is. And it needs to be more than an 8-hour block. Because I think that's what ours was maybe not even, I think it was a 4-hour block.
I don't even, honestly, I don't remember. To be honest, in 3 academies I went through, and I'm not saying anything bad about them, I don't remember doing anything that was like strictly focused on mental wellness for myself. I don't remember anything up to the
I only remember EAP walking in, because I remembered when I met Dr. Ginger, I was like, oh yeah, I remember you walking in, and they gave us this book, which I ended up getting divorced in my first academy. And it was the book, I think I Love a Cop is what it was called.
I'm not familiar
and it was by whatever that psychologist is from Montgomery County. And it's, I'll get you the actual, I think it's I Love a Cop. And so my now ex-husband read it and said, yeah, I don't want to be married to a cop. So that was not helpful at all, but that's all I remembered. And it was only a couple hours block, and that was the end of that. It has to be centered around what wellness truly is. And it's more than just, we have a clinical director on our team, Trevor Wilkins. He's known as the Angry Viking. And he is fantastic. But he and I have this conversation all the time because it's frustrating. We talk about awareness, right? And we talk about awareness on suicide awareness or mental health awareness. And like, okay, well, I'm aware. We're all aware. We've heard about it. We've heard the terms. We know. But it's the then what? Like, where's the resolution? Where's the solution? Where's the resolution? Where are we going with this? And we're not talking about that. And so it's, we're on our end developing our curriculum and where we're going with that. And so, but that's the step that's missing. It's the then what, and that's where we have to go. So starting in the academy and then getting to the then what, because we're way past the awareness. And we're still talking about awareness, but I'm pretty sure everyone's aware. And I'm being super sarcastic with it, but that's the reality of it.
Yeah, I was shaking my head no, and I was like, you can see me on the video. They can't, but I was like, I said, I wish that was the case, but they're still, we still don't know. Unfortunately, we're getting better. We are better, but we don't know as much as we should.
Right. I mean, we're really pushing the awareness is what I'm saying. It's aware.
Right.
but there's the then what. You've got to have a resolution. So if we're going to talk about awareness, we have to talk about the then what. Is there therapy? Are there modalities? What is it after the awareness part?
It's so funny we talk about this, and I think about my signature program, Greatness Beyond the Badge, and that's the last part of my book, part 3, that I talk about is that path to greatness. Like, what things do you need to do now to ensure that you're improving this awareness? And and there's several things I talk about, but the very last chapter I talk about time management. I talk about dedicating time to yourself every single day and improving yourself, recognizing your things, and like building yourself up, because just because you're aware, if you're not using any other tools, like, then you're just okay. Like, you're like, all right, my tire's flat. I know it's flat, but does that mean I need to do something next? Like, I need to go get air. I need to get a new tire. Like, I got to do something else. So what do you think some things you guys can do right now?
Exactly. I'm aware I'm exhausted most of the time. But then what? like I've got to practice that self-care. Like, that's where the then what part comes in. And that's the part where I feel like we are neglecting the then what. And that's what we should also be pushing. The awareness is great, but we need to do the second and third, the other steps. So
no, you're right. And that's I was on a call earlier, and myself and a colleague, we were talking about building a program like that, because he was telling me how he's very good at highlighting the aware side, but he needs help on the strategy building. And he was like, all right, well, I know you got that, but you're right, though. A lot of the programs out there, they're very good at us recognizing the signs. For me, I think it's still we're good at telling people how to recognize the signs, but we have to start showing the leaders how to recognize the signs as well, because once again, they are, I love peer support unit, crisis supports, peer advocates. They're one part of the puzzle, but that leader, the one that's evaluating you, the one that's doing your schedule, the one that's doing these manager tasks, the same way we sometimes hate our boss, we still respect them, and we want them to see what's going on with us. So kind of going back to recognizing some of these things, if you could take one leader right now at one of these departments, sheriff's office, PDs, correctional facilities, wherever, what would you sit there and what would you talk to them about in their leadership role on how to improve their people getting involved in like wellness programs?
That's a really good question.
I'm all about stumping people. People know.
I love
this.
Good.
I love the stumping. Yeah, and when people listen, they're like, Michael did it again. He had that one questionable question on there.
That was, you were writing like, I gotta stump her on this.
But it's true. But I mean, as you think about it, it's something that I start like because I've been in leadership roles now for 7 years, and it's some things that I haven't been taught, and everything I tell people, everything I teach on, everything I'm passionate about, I had to learn the hard way because it wasn't taught to me. So I had to go seek it myself. And I've went through the errors of being that leader that didn't recognize issues. I didn't intervene. I didn't know how to coach. And that's part of the system that I start working on. But it was things that I had to start doing because it wasn't taught to me. So a lot of things that I suffered through, I was like, man, I don't want the same leader to suffer through that, because I can tell you any chief or sheriff that is a good chief or sheriff or director or ward or whatever you want to call that CEO, they lose sleep if something happens to one of their employees. The good ones do.
100%.
And they always think back of what else could I have said. They're not that person that's going to drop off their business card and leave the hospital, and you have to wonder if they stop. The good chiefs and sheriffs, they're always going to go back and say, what could I have done? And a lot of times they don't have the answers, and we put them on a pedestal as if they're not human. And I've been on that pedestal, and I've looked at them out on a pedestal, and then I start to realize, you know what? They haven't been trained to recognize these things. And I don't know about the chiefs and sheriffs you've been around, Jenny, but no, I don't know many of them that have a PhD in psychology. So they're not like specialists in this area.
No. And most of the ones I've been around went from PO1 to PO2 to PO3 to corporal and up, right? And then they work their way up to, I mean, at least here in Georgia, that's how it is. But I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head. A good chief, a good sheriff are ones that want to learn, that are always wanting to learn. Because when you stop learning, you're dead. I have no idea who said that quote. I need to find out because I quote it all the time, but it's true. You know, I have had leaders who think that they know it all, and it's almost like they refuse to learn more, and they're the ones whose troops are ready to quit left and right. They're done.
Correct.
And it's the leaders who are in positions who are like, teach me, train me. I'm willing to, you know, learn more. One of the things I've said is, you know, there's the leaders who lead from the front always, who always want to be in the front and say, follow me, follow me, follow me. And then there's the leaders who walk alongside their troops. And those are the leaders who are the true leaders who say, what can I do for you? Jocko Willink said that on one of his podcasts I heard. He said, you know, a real leader isn't one who's like, do for me, do for me, do for me. They also say, what can I do for you?
Yes.
And that shows so much to those that they're leading. And in the mental health world, it does the same as well, because you've got the officer. Sorry, I'm just getting over the flu, so that's why I keep coughing. But
no, you're good. Trust me. Hey, this is real. I always tell people this is authentic stuff. Like this ain't.
It's so authentic.
Yeah, it's not. We're not going to crop out you coughing or hacking. No. Hey, part of the process.
It's not bird flu. It's not COVID. It's the flu. It's just the plain old flu. That spoke volumes, walking alongside and willing to learn. And that's, if I were sitting with, you know, a chief or a sheriff, it's very much that. It's just staying open to what's out there, because the mental health world is always evolving. There's always new things coming around. And that's what we're learning too with the Wounded Blue. Like, we're constantly in training. We're constantly learning about new things to put our peer team through, so that we're learning what's out there as well, so that we know how to help those officers who are reaching out to us. Because we not only help provide peer support, but we also help if an officer is going through the workers' comp process, if an officer is going through an EOC, if an officer is needing assistance with the legal field, you name it. If there's something that we can assist with, we will reach out to our resources internally or externally, however we can help. And I mean, that's kind of, you know, the conversation we would have with leaders as well.
Yeah, and it's cool to start having these conversations, because I believe, and this is just me, I believe the leaders that don't do some of that, it's because they never learned how to.
Yeah, you haven't make a really good point there, and it may be how they were trained as well, or how they, you know, came up through the ranks, and that's just the way it was.
Yeah, and they just they thought it would be okay. Like so them they're like the person that, the fact that a chief, or the fact that two people dropped the business card off, the one person didn't say, hey, this ain't a good idea. That tells me that either the other person was fearful to push back, or they were both from the same like thought, like, you know what, this is normal. Like, this is what we should do. Like somebody should have said in their circle, like, hey, no, you might want to stick around. It wasn't like she got hurt off duty and nothing happened. This is literally on, like, she was in the uniform doing her official duties and got hurt. Like, this wasn't just like she was sitting in a chair at house and she fell out and hit her head. Like, no, this is real stuff. Like there's more to this TBI. Like, it's a work-related TBI, like TBI situation.
Yeah, and what kind of made it worse is my mom was there. My mom saw them, and she said she'll be back in 5 minutes. She's in PT. I was in PT, you know, learning all whatever. She said she'll be back in 5 minutes, and they were like, and they dropped off their business card. I literally they didn't even say hi. I mean, they had opened the door, saw my mom, and she said, oh, she'll be back in 5 minutes. And they took their business cards, and the number on My mom described it to a T and showed me. There's a number on the door, and they stuck their business cards in the door and left. And I mean, I was like, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. And so that was what spoke so many, such volumes to me. And I realized, okay, you want me to know I'm a number? I got it. I got it. You don't have to tell me twice. So,
man, if people
yeah.
could see my face, like I just have like a look of disappointment, because every time I hear, and it's not like I hear these stories rarely, and I don't hear the exact putting the business card in the I don't hear that exactly, but I hear of the nonchalant response. And even before I started to pay attention to like mental wellness and law enforcement, I've been always, since I opened my business in 2017, I've always taught about leadership. Like that's something that I want to learn more about. And the best way to learn it is teach it. It's weird to say, but anybody that's an instructor or that's an actual teacher, the learning pyramid at the top of it, you're going to retain the most information when you instruct it, because you want to look like you're telling the right information in front of people. If you're just a student listening, you're only going to retain about 10 to 15% maybe. But as you go up that learning pyramid, if you teach it, you learn it. So I wanted to get very good leadership, so I started teaching. But one of the very first things and quotes that from John Maxwell that I used to always use, and it's more of an HR quote, I think John Maxwell took it from an HR study, is that 70% of people leave their organization because of their first level supervisor. Mm-hmm. And that always hit me hard, because I was just like, wow, it's not the benefits, it's not the pay, it's not the career guarantee. Like in government, you're going to keep your job 9 times out of 10 unless you decide to leave or unless something really drastic. But people are leaving because of personalities, and it's hard to quantify that sometimes, except through exit surveys, or maybe the person just says, oh, I didn't like my boss, so I left. But when you hear that, like on my standpoint nowadays, as I look at mental wellness, I start to think, okay, the other level to that is you're creating more stress on your employees than you need to. The environment's gonna, like in law enforcement, you're gonna have enough stress. Like you don't need any more. But that leader adding that extra layer of stress is a whole different thing. So I know you went through a lot during that time, especially that wasn't like it didn't turn the road. It just made the road even harder. And obviously that was, like you said, that was your wake up call to let you know, like, hey, this particular group isn't for me. And I'm happy you recognized it. Did you have any like self-doubts that you were making a bad decision when you left that group or that agency? Excuse me.
So I was forced out. I ended up having a couple lawsuits. Mm-hmm. And so with the settlement, part of the agreement was that I would leave. So I didn't have a choice.
Yeah, but did you feel bad that you had to push back to that level? That
100%.
You know what I mean? It's sad because you were doing the right thing. Like you're doing what you should do as a human. Like, no, I don't think most people, once again, the average person that's reasonable, and law enforcement term, it's usually what a reasonable person believes. Most reasonable people do not just want to go against their agency or their organization.
Not at all. I tried to rehab and get back to the road. My story is a little bit longer, actually, but for time constraint, I won't go into all of it. But I actually tried to go back to the road and had gotten cleared by the workers' comp doctor to go back. But unfortunately, part of my case was because I was a female. And so, unfortunately,
a whole other layer. That's a whole other level right there. That's a whole other podcast right there.
Yeah, a 6-year layer. And so, unfortunately, I was not allowed to go and I was forced out. So I ended up having to make some decisions. And that was the hardest thing for me, because all I wanted to do was serve and protect my community. Yes. I loved my community. The hardest part was where I worked. The silver lining for me, and that's the biggest thing now, is that things happen for a reason. We're all on the journey that we're supposed to be. And I'm a big believer in that. I think that everyone is where they're supposed to be. And I couldn't see it for a really long time. I went through a very, very angry phase. I didn't know I was a little angry midget. Because they're so short, I can say that. But
yeah. I would never say that. I'm 5'10", so I just leave that alone. Like unless I'm saying like someone that's 6'10", I may say a short joke for myself. But yeah, I leave the short jokes alone.
I can say it. But I had to deal with some anger issues that I didn't know I had. But I say, now the silver lining is I needed to go through everything I did, and actually now. And I shock people when I say this. I'm very grateful for what I went through with my department, and I'm glad my department, I mean, to some extent, not all of it, but some of it. I'm glad I went through what I did, because I would have never dealt with my shit. Excuse my language, but I would have never dealt with
law enforcement curses. Don't worry, they curse.
Yeah, true. I would have never dealt with my shit at all. I would have never sought therapy. And I think, okay, had I not been injured, I mean, granted, I'd had injuries up to that point too. I think if you're doing your job, you're going to get injured. But the injury that took me out, if that injury had not taken me out, I'd probably still be on the road suppressing every critical incident and just not dealing with it. And who knows where I'd be, maybe drinking, or maybe who knows, making really poor decisions. But for me, I ended up having to deal with it. And that was my silver lining. And I'm grateful for it now. And not only grateful for it, but it brought me to where I am now in the position I'm at. I was on the peer support team, then I took over as CO, and then eventually, of course, now executive director. But I still do peer support. That was my one thing that I said, if I'm taking this position, I'm still doing peer supports, because that is my why. And that is what I love to do, is connect with people. And if things hadn't happened the way they did, like I said, I wouldn't have dealt with what I needed to. But down the road, I also got remarried. I have 2 little kids that probably lead to some of my exhaustion, but it's still good. Have kids, they said. I had my first at 40 and my second at 42, which is totally not recommended, but whatever. That was my journey, right? We're all on the journey. Yeah, we're all on the journey we're supposed to be. And for me, that was the silver lining. And everything that I went through, the forgotten and abandoned feeling, the dark spiral, the dark rabbit hole, that was my journey. And now I have gotten to use that to help others going through that same journey. And I can relate now, instead of saying, oh, maybe I can understand. I actually can understand. So when officers reach out, I can say, look, I've been through workers' comp. I've been through EOC. Right. I've been through the dark side, and I understand the mental health side of it. So.
And like I look back at my own life and I hear like stories like yours, like the Mike Sugrus, the Matt Griffins, the Jason, I always mess up his last name, but he was the one that got burned in the fire about 20 years ago. Yeah, yes. So yeah, like I always think about like this, like you guys' stories, and I'm like, you know what? I never had a story that was that like directly put on me, and I'm happy that I didn't, because I've learned, like I can listen to your story and realize the things I need to do to build myself as a person. Like, and when I look at different strategies and different ways to help people out, I relate to the traumatic incidents that you naturally have as law enforcement. And I look at things I've been through, but you're right. One of the things, one of the main keywords that I heard out of what you just said like about a minute or two ago was the suppression side of it. Because without having that opportunity to slow down, which you had no choice but to when you were in that hospital for weeks, that's when you realize that something's like I'm really suffering. But a lot of us don't necessarily get that opportunity unless we have an extremely traumatic incident like that where we can't go, or you have a questionable shooting and now you're on administrative leave and you're at the house looking at the walls and nobody will call you back. So then you're confused there, or something bad happens to a family member that you have to deal with. So a lot of times it gets suppressed because we don't have that time to think about it. And I think that when people look at their own lives, a lot of us that are listening and they're thinking, well, I haven't had anything bad like that happen to me yet, but you still have had bad things happen to you. You shouldn't wait for to get into a shooting to where you have to take somebody's life to start thinking about, oh, my mental health. You should start thinking about it now, because when it does come, you don't want to have to go through resiliency classes to catch up.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know. I thought about that as you were saying. I think about, like, when I hear all the great speakers, all the people that are out there, I hear their stories and I hear what they're doing. I was like thinking, I sit there and I soak it in, because I enjoy hearing like how they are overcoming some of the things that happen. And one of the things I think of, like, thank God that wasn't me. Like, I don't have to go through that to learn the hard way. Like, I don't want to go through something bad happening to me at a job or a presentation, and that chief or sheriff just sticking their card in the door, or my CEO stick. I don't want to experience that. Like, that's not what I want to. I don't want to be led down that road. But people that do or have gone through it know, after especially listen to this episode, they know, look at how much more you have been able to do, because you finally recognize the things you were suppressing. Because we have people that go through their whole career for 30 years that suppress their emotions. And that's what we're trying to get away from. So, Jennie, like the story you gave, I hope people are taking it serious. Like, hey, don't wait until something bad happens for you to realize you can start working on yourself before, like in the academy, even before. If you're an office or a person that's applying for the academy, start working on your mental health, because by the time you get to the academy, it might be too late by then.
100%. If you're working at a bank, think about it, and think about, if you're looking into law enforcement, think about it before you get robbed at the bank.
I know. I had a review on my book. I think it was last month, or was one of the more recent posts. And the guy, he gave me 3 stars out of 5. And one of the things he said on there was that it wasn't enough law enforcement stories, that my stories were more corporate and it could apply to anybody. And I'm thinking in my head, yes, everybody goes through trauma. Like, I don't understand. Yeah, I like, you're talking about like the bank, like you going through the bank robbery, like that's trauma. Like why would I only try to impact law enforcement? I mean, obviously that's my industry, but why only them?
Yeah. Trauma happens everywhere.
Yes.
At the bank, getting robbed at the bank. Now, that's what led me into policing, because I was very sarcastic with the bank robber. I was not having a good day that day. I was supposed to have LASIK in a week, and they got it on film. I literally looked at him and said, "Are you kidding me?" And that's how I knew that's what my response would be. The rest of my police career was sarcasm. You just never know how you're going to respond in a incident like that. So anyway, then they asked if I had ever thought about policing, and I was like, nope, but I will now. And 6 months later, I was in the academy.
That is the way to do it. It is going from banking to policing. You're not the first person that's been on our show that said, I have to go back to a few episodes, but someone else told me that I want to say they were banking, and who was it? It was somebody that said they were a banker. Oh gosh, what's her name? She just I haven't posted that episode, but her and her husband, I think, were both bankers, and they're like, you know what? Let's go into law enforcement. They both did. They're both actually, they work for NYPD right now. So it is interesting that you say that, but you're right. It's not the most common thing to do. Some college graduates, like another guy told me he was going to college for music, and then he's heard how much law enforcement was making versus what he was going to make initially.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a huge jump. Okay.
yeah. That's why. Yeah, exactly. Like he went from like a singing musician, like in college, to like, I'm gonna be a police officer, and he's doing a heck of a job. He's great, but it was just like that transition. So, all right, I always tell my viewers, I try to keep it towards an hour. We're at that point right now. So, Jennie, obviously we've talked in extent about Wounded Blue and the things you're doing right now. If people are looking for you, what is the best way they can reach you?
They can reach me via email at info@thewoundedblue.org, or on Facebook at Jennie Hill on Facebook. The Wounded Blue is on Facebook as well. And then you can also find Barron's Instagram page at Barron, the Peer Support Service Dog.
Yes, yeah, guys, he does have an Instagram page, yes, because whenever I get myself liked on IG, I know it's Jennie going through his page. If it was his Paul's doing it, I would be impressed. I think he is smart enough to figure it out, but I know it's her right now until she trains him on that. So,
He's trying to write it. He's trying to write.
Yeah. He's at least looking at it like he's thinking about it. He was like, man, can I get my paw? I don't really have a thumb, so how can I get my paw to press it? So, but she's right. But yeah, like the IG guys, Facebook, email, that is great ways to reach her. Any final words, Jennie, for the audience?
If anyone needs any assistance with peer support, going through anything, whether it's mental health help, invisible or physical injuries, reach out to us. 844-TWB HERO is our number. We have a 24-hour phone number. And then you can also reach out through Messenger or through our website, thewoundedblue.org. You can message us there. Or again, my email is info@thewoundedblue.org, and it's manned 24/7. So definitely reach out to us for anything.
Guys, y'all don't have to suffer alone. Gals, you don't have to do it by yourself. You have resources out there. And most of the guests you guys have heard on here, whether it's about mental wellness, leadership, whatever it might be, just even it's about firearms, you guys all know that every guest that comes on here, I would not have them on here if I didn't believe that they had your best interest at their heart. I just wouldn't let them come on. I do a decent amount of vetting ahead of time. And maybe just might be look at their LinkedIn page or their IG, but you have resources out here, guys. And if you feel like she said, visible, invisible, whatever it might be, you're going through something, call. You guys have a 24-hour number that in a program where over 14,000 people have already been in, like they've helped over 14,000 people at Wounded Blue. So they obviously know what they're doing. So if you're looking for a group to even say, you know what, I just want to reach out and vent to, I just want somebody to talk to, go to them. They're definitely doing it. I mean, it's important for you guys to know that they are there to help you out and they're there to support you guys. So as usual, guys, we appreciate you listening to this podcast. Make sure you share, comment, like, make sure you get it out to others. Obviously, we're always trying to promote everybody that comes on here, and this is no different from any other guest. You guys have been excellent audiences, and I could tell based on some of the comments that I have seen that my podcast is gaining a lot of traction, and that's not because of me. It's because of the wonderful people like Jennie that come on here and they share their stories and they're honest in a conversational manner. You guys know we don't do anything scripted. This literally is us talking and us wanting to find ways to humanize the badge and see all of us grow. Thank all of you. I appreciate you taking your time, whether you're driving to work, working out, maybe you're between calls, maybe you're just at the house, like putting this on. But definitely appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to listen to what we have going on. Thanks again. You guys be safe. If you need anything, reach out. You know where to find us.
You've been listening to the LEO First Podcast. Michael has been in law enforcement since 2005. He's worked for 3 law enforcement agencies in 3 different states. He's a professional speaker who travels the country teaching about leadership development and self-awareness. And he's the author of a book called Greatness Beyond the Badge, The 3 Key Principles for Self-Awareness. It's Michael's passion to bring law enforcement members' stories to the front, so you get the real and raw take. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Michael on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Michael Laidler. On Twitter at Michael A. Laidler. On Facebook at Michael Laidler Leadership. Send an email to michael@michaelalaidler.com and hit the website at michaelalaidler.com. See you next time on the LEO First Podcast.
Like that, I'm going to be leaving a note on a vehicle advising him to remove it.